啦，我諗差唔多啦。
開始。
唔好意思啊，係差唔多啦，我哋開波啦。咁啊，好多謝，亦都係阿 Professor Lam，我哋嘅 advisor 喺度啊。咁亦都好開心你嚟到，因為我哋一陣間即係都可能個個都喺呢個 session 啦嚇。咁啊，我想 welcome 大家啦嚇，我哋啲 members to 呢個 forum 啦。其實係一個 preliminary discussion 嚟嘅，咁都係想聽下，即係大家對明日大嶼有啲咩睇法。咁但係我覺得呢個 session 咧，我哋好多人都就算有認識嗰個 background 個 planning 啊，譬如2030 plus 嗰陣時已經有個 ELM 出咗，咁好多呢啲 background 咧，可能我哋都未必有嘅。咁所以今日咧，我就想花少少10分鐘嘅時間啦，就播嗰個 video，等大家都記得有一個2030 plus 喺度嘅。咁啊第一啦，咁第二我一陣間就會有幾個 PowerPoint 就即係 bring us through from 2030到而家。咁我哋之後就可以開始嗰個 discussion 啦。咁或者喺呢個時間，我叫阿 Kitty 去片先啦。咁啊可以播一播片，咁我哋大約呢個8分鐘嘅片嚟嘅。
Over a century of development, Hong Kong has become a world-class city which we are proud of. Hong Kong is facing a number of challenges, including aging population, aging building stock, acute demand for land for various uses, rising aspirations for quality living, keen global and regional economic competition, innovation and technological changes, and climate change. Hong Kong 2030 Plus is a territorial development strategy to respond to the challenges and new opportunities. Our planning vision is to make Hong Kong a livable, competitive, and sustainable Asia's world city. We propose 3 building blocks to achieve that vision. Hong Kong is densely populated, but land is scarce. High-density development offers us convenience and a vibrant city life, while conserving a vast tract of natural assets. Yet, it also brings about environmental problems. How can we make our high-density urban environment more livable? First, we would continue to underscore compact development with railway as the backbone of transportation, complemented by low-carbon, environmentally friendly mode and comprehensive pedestrian and cycling networks. These would better connect our homes, workplaces and community facilities. Second, we propose to create quality living space, reinvent public space and public facilities, leverage our green and blue assets, develop a vibrant harbourfront, improve urban climate, and encourage people to exercise more for creating a quality and healthy city. Third, we would promote an inclusive city to take care of the needs of the elderly, youth and families. For example, by introducing more age-friendly and family-friendly facilities and fostering youth development. We seek to retrofit old urban areas and optimize new development areas to enhance the overall livability of our high-density city. Global and regional economic competition is keen. We need to move up the value chain, catalyze innovation and technology, support startups and promote re-industrialization, adding value to Hong Kong's economy. Further, we need to diversify our economy. Apart from reinforcing the pillar industries, we need to support the new emerging industries to broaden Hong Kong's economic base and to provide a range of quality jobs. We also need to provide education and training facilities and an environment conducive to nurturing, attracting and retaining talents. The above will allow Hong Kong to tap into new economic opportunities in the region, while enhancing our edges and competitiveness for sustainable economic growth. To pursue sustainable growth, we have to be visionary in creating development capacity while enhancing environmental capacity. To create development capacity, we propose to preserve land with high conservation value and accord a higher priority to utilizing degraded areas and sites at the fringe of built-up areas that are deserted or have low conservation value. Through reclamation outside of the Victoria Harbour or better utilization of brownfield sites, sizable strategic growth areas can be developed through comprehensive planning. We would create economic and employment nodes outside the traditional central business district. This could help establish new economic platforms, bring jobs closer to homes, and lessen the burden on transport infrastructure. We also need to enhance transport and infrastructure capacity, promote a transit-oriented public transport system, and reduce growth of private car ownership and usage. Creating development capacity will help resolve imminent shortfalls of land, respond to long-term needs, and improve quality of life. Meanwhile, we endeavor to integrate environmental conservation and biodiversity considerations into planning to create, enhance, and regenerate the environmental capacity and to improve our environment. We propose a smart, green, and resilient city strategy. Through adopting sustainable planning and design, smart mobility and green concepts, and establishing an information and communication technology platform, we could reduce carbon emission and enhance city efficiency for sustainable development of our city. We propose focusing our future development on a metropolitan business core, 2 strategic growth areas, and 3 primary development axes, as well as to better conserve our natural assets. The Metropolitan Business Core covers the traditional central business district around the Victoria Harbour, the transforming Kowloon East Business Node, and the new Smart Business Core at the East Lantau Metropolis. The 2 strategic growth areas comprise the East Lantau Metropolis, to be created through reclamation, and New Territories North, to be developed through comprehensive replanning of brownfield sites and abandoned agricultural land in the northern part of the New Territories. The aim of the East Lantau Metropolis is to create a new metro front and business core. The New Territories North is to become a new town that also promotes research and development, modern industries, and high value-added logistics. Both areas require strategic transport infrastructure connecting to the urban areas. The 3 primary development axes comprise the Western Economic Corridor, consolidating economic activities in the western part of Hong Kong, including the airport, Lantau Island, and the Northwest New Territories. The Eastern Knowledge and Technology Corridor links up clusters of high technology industries, tertiary institutions, and a science park and industrial estate near the future Lantau Hung Yuen Wai boundary control point in the eastern part of Hong Kong. And the Northern Economic Belt, spanning across land adjoining the boundary control points in the Northern New Territories, and is suitable for research and development, modern logistics, and other emerging industries. This conceptual spatial framework will help protect our natural resources while providing adequate land and transport infrastructure capacity to meet our social and economic development needs, making Hong Kong a smart, green, and resilient compact high-density city. Hong Kong 2030 Plus will guide the future planning of Hong Kong and shape its built and natural environment beyond 2030. Let's innovate to enhance Hong Kong and to prepare for the future for ourselves and our next generation.
好啦，好多謝大家今日 join 我哋啊！咁頭先就啱啱播咗係關於呢個Hong Kong 2030 Plus。sorry 啊，今日我哋講英文定中文？有冇英文人士喺度今日？ Oh, yes, there is. Okay, so let me speak in English. So yes, welcome to all members for joining us here today at this event. Today's discussion really is a preliminary discussion on some ideas about Lantau tomorrow. The vision has already been published, a very overarching vision, but the work in terms of the feasibility studies, the designs, etc., that kind of work is about to kick off. So this is why we think it's very important that the HKIQEP at this point in time, early on in the process, that we develop some ideas and we continually feed some of our suggestions and recommendations to the government and community as we go. And so today's forum is really just to provide a bit of an introduction on some of the background to the planning that the government had already done beforehand. And in fact, what I want to do right now is just to share just a few background slides to guide us into the discussion. So basically in 2016, the government had commissioned the Hong Kong 2030 plus strategy. And basically you'll see historically there's been sort of a regular review in terms of strategic planning, you know, how Hong Kong should develop over time. And so in this Hong Kong 2030 plus, further to the video that you just saw, and we can also send you the link to that video, which highlighted sort of the broad framework of what Hong Kong 2030 plus was about, you will see that there was basically mention of the two zones, which was the East Lantau metropolis and the NTN in the North Territories. So those are the two areas. And since East Lantau metropolis was already mentioned, there's also a more extensive report in terms of the high level sort of strategic planning, some ideas that were laid out for the East Lantau metropolis plan at the time. Now that's a much, I guess it's much smaller. You can see on the map, basically it's a much smaller version than what Lantau tomorrow is about, but it was already an option and well, basically it was already studied enough that in that position, it was strategically a good point to have an extension in terms of being a central transport hub and CBD area, or close to CBD area. And so in terms of what's in the, from ELM in 2018, the concept got expanded. And in fact, the Lantau Tomorrow vision, which was announced by the chief executive in 2018, our policy address, is a slightly bigger, ambitious plan, expanding upon the East Lantau metropolis idea. And so in the pamphlet, there are several concepts that they're reinforcing. For example, Hong Kong being a double gateway, but in order for us to achieve that, or to achieve also the objective of being a livable city, there is a conceptual development and strategic transport plan. And in terms of sustainability and conservation, they also talk about conserving Lantau. So there's actually a plan on that as well that's slightly more detailed. And then there's leisure and entertainment destination objective that they want to meet, as well as being able to stimulate sort of economic development, as well as conserving the natural land of Lantau. So if you look at that pamphlet, it seems to try to do everything. And of course, from a sustainability perspective, sustainability is about how do we continue to develop our economy while balancing social and environmental needs and constraints. And so today, this is the background to our discussion. Just thought we'd spend the first sort of 20 minutes, half hour on providing this context and backdrop that there has already been some work done. that even when the East Lantau metropolis idea was put forward, there had already been some work done behind that to say, okay, it's feasible for this to happen. So building upon that, because the work for Lantau Tomorrow is starting, we do want to hear ideas from our members. So in terms of a discussion, so I kind of like to make sure we're all on the same page. I know everyone, in terms of providing comments, bear in mind, the three kinds I'm assuming we're going to hear. Some are raising concerns, some may be contributing extra information, because actually many of you here are experts. Many of you here actually know a lot more history. In fact, you might already know a lot of details on some of the assessments that have already been done historically. So please do, provide some of that information to us so that we are all more informed as we continue with our discussion. And of course, the third type, which is I think the most important type of comment, is any suggestions on the way forward, any solutions, right? I actually think raising concerns should not be a priority necessarily, but it's more about raising what could be a challenge. And if you compare that with a potential solution on what can be done, that would be very appreciated. And of course, in terms of topics, anything environmental goes, air, waste, noise, EIA process, is there an issue there? All the way spanning to even the whole concept of, because if we want this project to actually achieve a more holistic, sustainable future, that there could be other considerations that are just not in the siloed areas that we also talk about typically from an environmental aspect. And so here I would like to open the floor to our members. In fact, Professor Lam, I wondered if you wanted to share any background and maybe even some of your preliminary thoughts.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Ginny. I think you have begun with a very good introduction, particularly the video about 2030 plus, as well as Lantau Tomorrow. And I wish to highlight that Lantau Tomorrow is not same as the East Lantau metropolis.
Okay.
In terms of size, Lantau Tomorrow is twice, at least, the size of East Lantau metropolis. Now, I think we have to bear that in mind. And I suppose today we're going to focus on Lantau Tomorrow, right?
Yes, that is correct. That is correct.
Okay, right. And I also wish to begin by, now, because you mentioned about EIA process, etc. Understand the government is going to undertake a study, which may be a feasibility study. I don't know the exact remit and the term. Definitely, it is not a project EIA study. It may be a feasibility study, maybe a Schedule 3 under the EIA ordinance. As a feasibility study, I've been thinking along the line. Now, being a freelance consultant for the World Bank, I've been looking at some mega projects, taking so-called international best practices. And I've been thinking, okay, if this is a mega project, for example, in the Belt Road Initiative, what are the international best practices which would be of relevance to Hong Kong? As a feasibility study, I think the first question is about the need. Probably it's about the need of reclamation of this scale. I think you're all aware that the government established the Task Force on Land Supply in 2016. The Land Supply Task Force finally produced a report at the end of the year 2018. the task force endorsed the East Lantau metropolis, but not Lantau tomorrow. So I think we cannot assume there is the need of this scale. The task forces never touch on Lantau tomorrow. So I think we have to make that clear. So we cannot assume that there is a need to begin with. After a period of 18 months, I think 56 meetings, etc., the final report of the task force only focused on East Lantau metropolis, reclamation of 1,000 hectares. Okay, now if it were a mega project, for example, supported by international development banks, what would the bank ask for and focus? I wish to briefly highlight on a few. Firstly, of course, about the need assessment. Assuming that there is a need, then the first question to ask is alternatives. Alternatives of meeting the need. On the one hand, if there is an established need, then the question to ask, what are the alternatives of meeting the need? We are all aware of the different options of land supply in Hong Kong. I think a few years back, I think our organization, HKIQEP, etc., also thought, why don't we do a strategic environmental assessment of the various options? Because for each option, there are pros and cons. So what are the alternatives of meeting the need? Alternatives in terms of the scale. In this case, the scale of reclamation. Do we really need to take the 2,000 hectares as something given, as we must follow? Because alternatives can be in terms of the scale. Alternatives can also be in terms of location, configuration, engineering, etc. For all mega projects supported by international development banks, in the alternative analysis, there must be one. That is no development option. If there is no development, or if there is no reclamation, what are the disbenefits and the benefits? We do not have to take any prejudgment, but I'm saying that these are what the studies would follow. Of course, then there are various issues such as biodiversity, the effects of the project on marine environment, etc. Climate change, I think, in what you have shown, building resilient society is important. How does the project affect carbon emission is important. Conversely, how can we to make the project climate proof? That is, it will not fall into pieces. Okay, so this should be built in any study that I hope the government is going to do. Cumulative effects assessment, cumulative impact assessment is usually one of the key components of any feasibility study supported by international development banks. That is the effects that we can reasonably expect, not just at the project site that is in Hong Kong, but in the neighbor, in the reasonably foreseeable future. One thing that I can think of is about the sourcing of reclamation material. Where do they come from? Entirely from Hong Kong or from other places? If it comes from outside Hong Kong, then the international best practices is to look at the effect of the source location. What are the impacts over there? So this is something probably such a feasibility study would look at. So to sum up, I think for feasibility study of this scale, the benchmark, I think, is international best practices. We cannot assume there is a need of this scale. The need has to be justified and established. And we must consider alternatives in terms of providing land for our need for housing and for other economic activities. Alternatives considering the benefits and disbenefits of various supply options. Alternatives in terms of scale of reclamation. Of course, always what are the disbenefits or benefits of no reclamation at all. No, I don't have any prejudgment. I think the study should be undertaken in such a way to provide the relevant information for the decision maker. At this moment, I think Hong Kong has been really in the forefront of EIA studies in the last 20, 30 years. We are well known all over the world. Hong Kong wishes to play a part in the Belt Road initiatives, to play a part in mega project in infrastructure building in countries of the Belt Road initiative. So I hope in doing a feasibility study will show that we are capable of doing the international practices, which I've highlighted. So these are my 2 cents.
Thank you very much, Professor Lam. Of course, with your extensive experience on international best practice, that is very sound advice. That I think anything that we do or that is going to be undertaken in regards to developing Lantau, whether it is at the ELM smaller scale or being able to demonstrate the need of the bigger Lantau Tomorrow vision, it should be done in accordance with best practice. I would like to also say online, we do have the chairman of our institutional partners also here today with us. We have William from HKIOA, HKIOA. And then we have Freeman from HKEMA. Is that HKEMA, right? And then we have Isa, who heads up HKIEIA. And we have CF Leung, who chairs SaiWen Hong Kong. And we have Vincent, who chairs HKI EPO. And so they're also here with us today, and they're also going to be listening in on, you know, what people have to say, because I think all of us sort of want to get together and probably discuss a more holistic view in terms of, you know, what kind of recommendations we may decide to put out in terms of the HKIQEP platform. So they're here supporting us here today. But while we were on the topic of international best practice and really making sure that any study that is undertaken is to the best practice, I wondered if Isa, as the chairman of HKIEIA, if you might have any comments or anything you would also like to share at this point in time. Isa, you're muted. I don't know if you... Okay, I'm assuming either he has no comments yet or he's having some technical difficulties. I don't know which one. But having said that, I'd like to also, since I don't see any questions, so by the way, all of you do feel free to write in the chat box if you don't want to open your mic. But if you do want to open your mic, it's probably best if you raise your hand on the participants list, and then we can unmute you so that we don't have too much noise, since we do have almost 100 people online right now, so which is amazing. So thank you all for joining. I wondered, Professor Lam, I mean, I think going back to you, so we know sometimes this happens, but if the concept that a feasibility study to justify whether this needs to be this big or not is not done, let's say, and instead there's already a, and this is hypothetical, purely hypothetical, because you're right. If it is possible to actually do it right, then spending the time to actually do the needs assessment, the feasibility assessment beforehand is the best way forward. But let's say, hypothetically, and I don't know why, but let's say that cannot be done, and that Lantau tomorrow will continue to happen. And, you know, and as we speak, if there's already tenders being drawn up and etc. for all the types of work that would be done as if it is this bigger version, which is Lantau tomorrow, what would you say would be the most critical points to take note of now, given because because the needs assessment has not been done?
Well, if we put aside the need assessment, probably let me submit for your consideration that even if we do the need assessment, the assessment is only to provide information for decision making. I respect any administration to take the final decision and to take the final say. Only that the scientists will provide our knowledge to them. But if say that is the way they wish to go ahead, of course. Then I think the key issues would be, I think, still the marine environment, the impacts on biodiversity. There are a lot of speculations of whether it can be done or whether it shouldn't be done. But such a thorough analysis should be undertaken, at least to convince people to provide the scientific facts so that informed decisions can be made. I'm concerned about the climate-related issues. How high we should build the site, okay? To which level? We have seen different speculations or projections by different people, and that should be ascertained by a thorough analysis, having regard to past records and projections into the future. Projections because Lantau tomorrow will be a project lasting for 50 years, a century or 2 centuries. Okay, so what are the likely changes? For mega projects supported by international development banks, they have the time span of 50 years or 100. They recognize that the return periods of the same magnitude event will short up change over time. And so working out carefully, okay, to what extent they will stand the severe impacts, etc. So I think that should be done, at least to allay the concern of the ordinary public, because they have heard so many different views, to make sure that the investment can really stand. Build a resilient society is also important, because for a project lasting for that long, then we have to consider if really the unexpected does occur, how are we going to recover? I think humankind has gone beyond the stage of saying that there would not be any impact. Effects of climate change will be with us. We sometimes have to live with it. Okay, so if the damage is done, what is the contingent plan? How are we going to recover? I've seen some projects will assume certain damage is done and built into the system, built into the government, as well as the society, they have the so-called resilience to recover sooner than the others. An analogy is that if we fall, our knees are hurt, okay, how can we recover as soon as possible? So I think that calls for the collaboration between government agencies, as well as a built-in contingency plan system, emergency response action plan, something like that. I think that would be useful.
Yes. I think even Hong Kong as a whole really should be thinking of that, not just for the Lantau tomorrow situation, given that, you know, the climate is changing and these impacts are inevitable, that potential flooding, etc., may still continue, frequent storms. So, you know, that is true for the whole of Hong Kong, but the fact that, you know, reclaiming a new piece of land at sea level obviously is a big concern. And so, and I think however, some have argued that sometimes even having islands or reclaimed land that is sort of further out from the wanting to be protected piece of land is one way of actually mitigating some of the impact of severe sort of events, of flooding, for example. I wonder if anyone here online has any views on that. Professor Lam, I don't know if you, obviously you must.
Well, I think that is why I'm always an advocate of alternative analysis. You can begin with different options and scenarios. Okay, something as big as Lantau tomorrow, something only that big as East Lantau metropolis, or a more distributed system. Now, there are definitely benefits and disbenefits. And it's only through a thorough analysis showing the benefits and disbenefits that we can take a sound decision at the end.
Anyone else online that would like to contribute any comments or thoughts on this?
This is Isa.
Hi, Isa.
I'll jump on to something else. Professor Lam has already told us about the climate issues.
Call me Casey.
Yes, Casey has already talked about the climate issue. For me, I like to talk about people issue. Call me Xi Hui. But just recently, our honorary Lo Wai Kok has already tried to give our environmental professional a new place in Daya Bay. He was talking about that we environmental guys have a lot to do over there. The same thing comes into my thoughts. Since we are having this in our own land, how will our profession benefit from it? This would be one of my issues. Yeah. Because not only we are going to have reclamation, but what goes on top of it is still a couple of years to go on, and how environmental as a profession can benefit. What I mean is, how can our members can benefit on that piece of land with that much of time to work on.
Well, I'm going to say there would be benefit, right? I mean, there should be more jobs, more jobs or more environmental talent that's needed, whether it is in the design or EIA phase, construction phase. Operation is when it's not going to be as much probably, but the whole sort of construction, and if it's extended, it's almost like, we get as employed as the engineers do for as long as the projects are moving ahead and going along. I'm assuming that's the situation. So Isa, I think, it seems positive from that perspective. However, I guess even in the longer term, is there an opportunity for us to use this this project to help further strengthen the recognition and appreciation of our industry, the importance of our industry, that when we have experts that are involved, that we can actually design, and build better and more sustainably, because these considerations were already integrated very much upstream, as opposed to being an afterthought later on when you can't change very much.
Right, exactly. So shouldn't our profession get recognized starting from now? This is a very big job that's going to come up for the coming 10, 18 years around, because 2030, right? So yeah. I think this is the right time when the government start recognizing us now, and then picking us onto the project.
Very good point. And we will see how we can make use of this to actually further move towards this. I mean, we are already gathering momentum, even with the government. And as you mentioned, the White Glock also has helped us quite a bit to get us in front of the government and getting the recognition that we should get. And maybe, Isa, you're right. Maybe this is one of those opportunities for us to get recognition because of the importance, the critical component for whether this should and how it could go ahead is probably the environmental pillar, being the most significant one. So thank you, Isa, for reminding us this is an opportunity for us to utilize the space to boost our industry and our profession. Anybody else that would like to contribute or has any comments? Is there, I was going to say, Vincent, as the chair of the IEPO, so of course, I mean, whether this project, whether it's ELM or Lantau tomorrow, what are the pros and cons that you may see, Vincent?
Regarding our department, Environmental Protection Department, I think we have a role to provide all our environmental comments or advices on, at the early stage, whatever the development would be, in terms of climate change, in terms of air quality impacts, or all the process in the EIA or or even in the earlier stage, like the strategic environmental assessments, so that when the designers or the planning guys are working on such a large scale of development, they have bear this in mind, such as, for example, in terms of air quality impacts, if they have such a large cloud of populations there, there would be climate change impacts and how that should be built to have climate resilience, or to have the minimize or reduce, or even with zero carbon emissions from, say, the EV infrastructures built in the system, so that they don't have to sterilize all the lands around those highways connecting to these big populations. So I think the considerations in terms of the development, not only on the commercial district, on the population or residential developments, they have to consider the environmental impact in the overall design of any new development. So I think in every stage of the development, even whenever we have provide the comments for the planners to develop the detailed infrastructures or whatever, we have an important role to play here.
Do you see? Oh, so I don't know if you can answer this question. I was going to ask, like, I suppose, whether earlier on we talked about the bigger needs study, whether that's going to take place, or is it just going to we're just going to go ahead and try to just do all the studies that are needed for the bigger one. Do you feel there's a higher probability for one way or the other?
I think the overall development policy is not under the Environment Bureau. So I think it's personally, I think it's quite difficult at this stage or at the early stage of the proposal to say something that can change the direction. I think that's what I feel from such a kind of project.
Okay. And obviously,
Ginny.
Yes, Freeman.
Yeah, just want to sort of say something or contribute to the discussion. And I mean, obviously, Casey has bring up a lot of great points on what we should do about this study. But I think I just want to say, I mean, obviously, I'm not representing any organization or institutions. I'm just speaking out from my observation, as well as I think 2 years ago, I actually wrote an article on the Hong Kong Economic Journal and about these projects, and from an environmental perspective, as the vice chair for the HKIQEP, and I think we actually, I mean, 2 years on, I mean, the government actually has not trying his best to engage the public to understand what people want, and I think it's probably they will embed something in the study framework, but knowing all this sort of feasibility study, I mean, they have a set time frame, and they have sort of fixed stages of working, and it's very difficult, as far as I see it. The government would take some of the suggestions, I mean, the great suggestions like Casey, to go back to the drawing board to see whether there's a need for the project, and whether how many different alternatives can they accommodate to investigate. But bear in mind, I mean, they all have this fixed sort of framework work along, and obviously this is a bit unfortunate, and you know, the invitation for the expression of interest been out, and is still yet to see what would actually happen. But I really urge, you know, whoever involved in will seriously consider, you know, what the people would like to do about this big piece of land if it's going ahead. And also, obviously, all this climate change, carbon neutral, and also a lot of the open space and would need to be considered, as well as sort of total different transport network. Vincent talking about EV, but how about, you know, sort of the autonomous vehicle and things like that? It's not, well, I mean, I think we can try influence the outcome to make it, you know, meet the future generations need. You know, I don't think this will help me too much, but but as just you know, sharing some idea, and this is the, if they are not going to the Greater Bay Area, I mean, they will need to make Hong Kong a better place for them to live on. That's my 2 cents.
Thanks very much, Freeman. In fact, so I think, thank you for your input, because I think that gives a little bit of insight as to what is more likely to happen, and therefore, even more so, this is why we do feel it is very critical that we start in the environmental professional industry. We really have to start discussing very early on now, as much as information and recommendations that we can have earlier on, that we would want to give the government, that we should actually look at that. So that's why we're having this event today, is let's say that worst case, we call it the worst case scenario. And if it's already going to happen, then okay, we need to move forward to kind of mitigate and or avoid any negative impacts that could happen, because it was not well thought out, or time was not taken to look into all the possible issues, and these issues were not, the solutions to these issues were not well debated or discussed. So I think time is always important, and I think, Freeman, you raised a really important point. I think that's usually one of the problems, is that when you don't leave yourself enough time, which when the government is in a hurry sometimes, then you don't have that space to really think things through in a more holistic fashion that could have made it a little bit more strategic and longer term in operation. So we do have some comments here on the chat box too. Thank you for your comments. So CF, he was, I think this tallies with what Freeman was saying, is that in fact, you know, where is the discussion on the use of the land? Let's say if it already is happening, then this huge piece of land, what is going to be on it? And should we have more visionary goals, such as a low carbon livable city or a net zero city? There's been talk about that. How would you design in the sense that it is zero emissions, right? Let's say it's a zero emission zone, for example, enhancing walkability. And his second point, for example, is also to look at the buildings themselves. Can they be, you know, as green as is possible? Enhancing zero waste design. So these are all things that you know, we'll take note of, because it's true. I think part of it, sometimes part of a vision is to, you know, it's not just having the land, but if it's going to happen, what do we want it to deliver? in terms of an environmental goals in the environmental area. We know that it's there to provide land. We know it's there to boost economy, but what are the environmental related visionary goals that we'd like to implement? Does anyone have anything to add to that, or? Yes, Professor Lam.
Well,
yes.
Now, I think it would be extremely useful at this stage if the Lantau tomorrow is going to go ahead, provide input on how it should be designed and built to make it green, livable, as carbon neutral as possible, etc. Equally important is to how to make that happen. I remember almost about 20 years ago, when Gordon Seal was the secretary, we really had a good chat, a good talk in the ACE on how now the HKIQEP site should be designed, especially the plot body, because he had various innovative ideas. We didn't need to convince him. Green, okay, low carbon transportation, mobility, etc. They were all on the plan. But now, these are like dreams, all for free. So it's important to make them on the plan. We have also to look for ways to ensure that those beautiful things on the plan would be implemented over time. People may change.
Yeah, actually that's important. Implementation challenges because of change of people.
Yeah.
But also I think potential business models. Sometimes we think, oh, things will just happen on their own. Someone's going to take care of it. And you're like, yeah, but who? Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to? And I think sometimes the whole concept that we want a industry to come in, or we want to attract an industry, but you say, but how? Why? I mean, just throwing money at them doesn't mean that it's sustainable for them to stay here, because, you know, if there's no demand or no need, no business case for them, they're not going to stay for long. So I think you are absolutely right. I think that implementation part, which is, I think it's obviously a combination of, you know, not just sort of, yes, we want the measure to be implemented, but there are economic and social implications in order to get it implemented.
Ginny, I think you've fallen short of saying, now, I think you've got a very good point. Probably we don't need a plan which has to be implemented with rigor, with close monitoring, but something which would happen more spontaneously. Now, I don't know what are the driving forces behind private-public partnership. Something that doesn't require a lot of supervision, whipping, twisting of arms, etc. So if once a plan is there, it would flow on more spontaneously. So is there any role, for example, for the private sector to come in, or anything that would provide the incentive for that to happen? So I think we need to give more thought on top of a good plan that we would like to advocate.
That's a very good point. In fact, I think coming from that, I think the point about, therefore, not just the government and the planners thinking of the future, they should bring the business sector to the table and discuss, well, this is our plan. Now, if we're going to do this, how do we make it attractive for the business sector to be a part of this and to get this done as soon as possible, right?
Yeah.
That they need to be at the table.
Yeah. Now, of course, the business sector would play and can play a very important role. Certain social enterprises, NGOs, they're also key. How can we engage them? Let them play a part too, so to keep the momentum, to keep it going.
but it's also engaging them earlier, right? I think that's the whole point. You don't, you don't engage them afterwards, and then you've designed something which actually, you know, no one's attracted to. Yes. Okay. Very, very good point. We had another comment here on sort of, I think this goes back to what Casey had mentioned on our members' concerns. So Anthony, he had mentioned the ecological and fishery impacts from different options of reclamation. Of course, he's in your camp. He believes, you know, there really should be this scenario analysis of no reclamation, some, and more. You know, what would have been the impacts of those? But I almost wonder, can we turn? So again, I think, you know, Casey, with your experience, when there's something, when this much land is created, but at the same time, you know, there may also be opportunities for bringing back, is there opportunity to bring back more fishery, or sort of to create sort of new, or bring back old industries because they are basically more environmentally rooted, but they are sustainable if done properly. I think it's just that people have let go of farming and fisheries because, you know, working for the finance sector is more attractive. But the whole point is the society at the end of the day, you know, it's still, there is still value to some of these older models of business. I mean, they are, they could still exist. Or maybe they don't. I mean, maybe it is just financially not attractive enough because everything else is more attractive. I don't know. But obviously, sometimes there are opportunities that could be created, like creating more more recreational or ecotourism opportunities, for example. Casey, have you seen that? I mean, any ideas? Perhaps is this something maybe Lantau tomorrow really could have and should have, because obviously it's one of the biggest islands and there's so much, and we want to preserve, right? We want to preserve a lot of the ecology there. You know, could there be ecotourism combined with, you know, fisheries, etc.?
Hi, Jenny. This is, oh,
Yes.
sorry. Hi, this is Grace. Sorry, I'm
Hi,
in
Grace.
a very
Okay.
noisy place. So I just
Okay.
keep it short. So gathering what you and Professor Lam has talked about. So I'm wondering, maybe we need a more holistic sustainability assessment that would review all the impact from the environment, social, and economic aspects, you know, in addition to the EIA. So I just have this thinking in mind. And also because, you know, we're going to have a lot of infrastructure if we're going to have the Lantau tomorrow. So, you know, when we are looking at those infrastructure, maybe the project sustainable infrastructure will be something that would help us ensure that the project would, you know, go in the right direction. And so about the point of involving the business sector, you know, I think the green finance is something that maybe we could leverage on for this Lantau tomorrow as well. So that's my suggestion.
Okay, Grace. So sustainable infrastructure, green finance, and you had mentioned sort of a broader sustainability assessment. Is that any different? Sorry, the assessment you were talking about, that's not the same as a typical SIA we were talking about earlier on. You're talking about more specifically infrastructure.
Yeah, I think that would include always environment, social, and as well as economic impact as well.
Now let's think of that.
Sorry, someone was saying something. Okay, so Sorry,
Hi, Ginny.
yeah, hi.
It was
hi,
me.
Clara.
It was Clara.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. I'm back. I'm back. I'm still trying to listen. It's amazing how that the members are filling ideas into this, like, well, obviously right now, because this Lantau tomorrow thing, we only secure the initial sum of money to do the feasibility study. All right. So honestly, I don't even though I was kind of involved in the beginning of this Lantau ELM, but I don't know what happened now because it's basically the CEDD or the office handling this. But I'm sure actually they will flow out some proposal, because right now we heard about like some members say, okay, green finance can be injected into this kind of proposal, eco tourism, zero waste sort of city or low carbon city, etc. like this. This is basically, I think the government should honestly take in view of all the ideas, because right now the project seems very damaging to our environment. I'm sure that like most of people say this project, oh no, it's not really good to the environment, and also nothing mentioned about the climate change issue. But I think the government should take these opportunities to inject more, like I won't say compensation things. I mean, inject more this idea into sort of make up the loss to the environment, like injecting more environmental benefit issues like ecotourism, green finance, and things like that. And I think this is the message we need to maybe, present it to the government at this early stage. Ask them to, invite us or other parties to throw out ideas. So right now, I don't have the program. I don't know what study they are going to do, or even though I'm sure they will carry out some feasibility study or have a conceptual plan, or even they have a, I don't know, a public consultation forum to invite like relevant stakeholder to throw out ideas. I'm sure they will do that. But yeah, it's a good opportunity that now all the members right now to think out of the box what we want, basically. All right. I'm sure this is a very controversial project. I mean, people have different wish. Some people, for example, for the Hong Kong people, they like to have more housing. Okay, it's really needed. Are we going to build more housing? Or even though when we're talking about like cooperation with the private sector, then we come back to the trust issue. Some Hong Kong people might say, hey, come on, commercial sector, they will be, at the end of the day, they will be turned out to the estate public house, estate housing project. I mean, basically, not really doing any very good to the environment. So we have to, we have to get prepared for, answering these all quiz questions. And what our institute can offer is basically we need to think a little bit holistically what we really want to do. To either we talk to the government or we just contribute to the consultation process or what. I think this I will give it up to you to think about and lead us to have a more like solid the way to move forward on this commenting on this Lantau tomorrow. No, I just want to share a little bit about this.
Thank you, Clara. I think it's a very valid point. Like the point, it is a controversial topic. But because of that, if everyone is afraid to talk about it, then we're not going to get the solutions that we need to have implemented. And quite often we know that we would like to we would first of all like to prevent and avoid, and that's our job. Our job is to say something so that we can try to prevent and avoid. But life is also about things where you can't control, and sometimes that controlling power may not be in our hands. And when that is the situation, then our next thing that we should do as a responsible professional is to provide the best solution possible to minimize and avoid negative environmental impacts given the situation, given what needs to be achieved. And that is critical, that just because they don't take our first recommendation on not, maybe avoiding or not doing certain things, that we don't just stop there and, oh, well, give up, throw our hands, and then they just go and do even more damage. All right. So I think it's very important we keep on it. This is our job. You know, to be an environmental professional means at every turn of the decision that we are always trying to figure out what are the solutions to minimize whatever the final plan or design or project is going to be or needs to be. We have done our best to provide solutions to minimize these impacts. So Clara, thank you for reminding us. I think it is very important. We as an institute, people will ask us, well, what do you think of Lantau tomorrow? And right now, you know, this is why I want to have this forum. I know there are probably many of us who think, well, we question why we need it. All right. I think it's natural for all of us. But at the same time, we also understand practically that if it's going to go ahead, if we're not there and providing input, giving guidance, then what comes out could be so damaging to environment that it really could be very unsustainable. So this is why, you know, I understand there probably are a lot of people here who have certain concerns and doubts, but I think the point is, if they go ahead, that's what I'm worried about. If they go ahead, we need to be there now to inform or inject anything we can into their potential tenders or requests for tenders, etc., so that these elements are already there. All right, because I don't want them to be missed out at an early stage.
Yeah, totally agree. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Yes, KC.
Now, could I say something? I'm not
Yes.
sure that we are at the stage of no return. That is, Lantau tomorrow is given and must proceed. Not that I'm advocating for throwing that out, but I think if we say, okay, if we undertake a feasibility study, consider doing ELM, the 1,000 hectare option, as well as the Lantau tomorrow 2,000 hectare option, and with the benefits and disadvantages all spelled out. Now, because we can always take an incremental approach, because building Lantau for tomorrow is projecting into the future. When we do something, we always adopt an incremental approach. We can say we start with A first, with an option of further developing into a bigger one. And if we take only option A, which is smaller, the benefits and disadvantages are there. If we do the bigger one, these are the benefits and disadvantages. Provide such information for the decision maker, for them to take the final decision. Okay. And so that is another way, because we won't build Lantau tomorrow, say we shouldn't do it in one single piece.
Yeah.
It has to be incremental.
Yeah.
We've been doing that all along. I think reclamation is like that. Even Castle Peak Power Station, Chimney 1 and 2, in 2 stages.
Yes, even ELM, it's going to be in stages. So, I mean,
Right,
ELM
right.
itself is going to be in stages. So, absolutely. And maybe that is the approach to convince them that, you know, it's more, let's do it as we go. Because yes, in a modular fashion, as we need to expand, that option is still there. We're not saying no, but how do you expand? And I think we go back to, I mean, one of the things I had in my head was, does it have to be one big piece or can it be a number of different pieces? I don't know. Like, this is where I was thinking, well, you know, maybe there are different ways to actually increase the amount. But if we don't do the scenarios or the analysis of the different options, then we're not going to know which would be the best balance. Yeah, agreed. Okay, good point.
I think it's open to discuss the topic, and our environmental professionals should provide good planning practice when the project is go ahead. So we want a sufficient community there. So it's a big piece of land providing people living there. Believe the population density should be lower than, because some the people moving there.
Actually, that's one thing about it, is the population piece. I'm not sure. I'm just wondering whether they would have adjusted the population estimates if once the bridge now has opened, and you know, as we integrate, the whole point about the movement of population, you know, that's another point. I think, you know, maybe that needs to be better done in order for us to partially answer this question, the need, right? Because, you know, we're talking about the need. There was one question in the box about, it's a good point. So it's a good point, but I think it could still be done. So someone mentioned, Sally has mentioned that since the practice of studying climate change resilience in local projects. So for local projects, there are no relevant legislation or guidelines to make sure that assessment is being done, which is true. However, having said that, I have seen government implement new assessments. So in fact, I probably, along with Freeman, was amongst the first to be involved with the first climate change related impact study in Hong Kong, when it was not, you know, people, there was no there's no legislation, there's no requirement, but the government realized and thought this was important. Therefore, you know, they decided this was an assessment that needed to be done. So I would like to be more, hopefully, Sally, more positive that, you know, given the importance of climate change, that the resilience study, resilience component of it is not going to be left out, because such studies are already being done by some of the companies that, so for example, even the power companies, we have undertaken adaptation and resilience studies for specific assets. So, you know, because it is very important. So it's not that we don't, I mean, there are methodologies to do it. And I think hopefully the government obviously will take that into consideration. So we are nearing the end of our time. We have 5 more minutes left. Does anyone else have any comments and views on this? I mean, one thing you know, as Casey was describing the incremental approach, I thought, you know, one thing we could do, it's not just one position paper. I think we sort of put bits of position papers out at certain times to provide information at the right time. So for instance, even now, maybe it is not too late to at least try to still advocate for an incremental approach on sort of the feasibility study, if that is possible. But meanwhile, as I said, I think I'm so used to planning for the worst. I'm a very risk-averse person, so I always plan for the worst case. So having said that, I think maybe that could be, you know, one of the first suggestions we have is on that incremental side, which doesn't say, you know, we're not looking at the possibility of expansion, because I think it's kind of possibly inevitable, but how to do it and when is it justified? I think that's the point. And in fact, what's interesting about technology is when you do everything too early, then you're stuck with older technology. Sort of the newer components, the newer parts of development, they always incorporate newer technologies. So in fact, even how do you build in a way that by the time the new sections of your land are built, that the old sections can still adopt newer technologies? Again, this is something that I think is very important to think into it, because sometimes that becomes a problem too, because once you've had entrenched old technology, it's very costly to replace or to renew. So,
Hi, Jenny.
Yes, Grace.
About the last question, I have something to supplement.
Yes.
About the climate risk and resilience study. In fact, the local green building standard, BIM+, in its latest version 2.0, and they've already included climate risk assessment as one of the criteria, so that if the project is committed to this green building standard or the sustainable infrastructure standard that I mentioned before, then we could ensure that they would take into account the climate risk assessment as well as the resilience study in the Lantau Tomorrow project. So this is something that I would like to supplement. So this is also an example that our profession, environmental profession, in fact, we could collaborate and work together with other profession like the green building professional in this kind of project. And in fact, I think the synergy that we could create would really benefit the outcome of the project. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Grace.
Yes, Jenny, tell CEDD that they can come to HKIQEP because we have all sort of specialists. Green building, green finance, ecologists, EIA, EMNA, whatever.
That's correct.
They have it.
Yes, we do. We do have every sort.
Yes,
so,
I mean, yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone, for all of your time. KC, do you have any final words of wisdom you'd like to share with us?
Not really. I think Hong Kong has done extremely well in terms of EA in the past. We should keep the momentum and show that we are capable of doing great things.
Yeah.
Great. And I totally agree with that. And I think going back to Issa's original point, how does the environmental profession show its worth? I think this is the right time to do it. So thank you, everyone, for all of your comments today or to this evening. And we will keep you all informed of our next step. Watch this space because I think, Casey, we were just saying, we should actually meet a bit more often instead of too many months in between. And in fact, sometimes having these forums is a pleasure just to catch up with everyone. So let's see if we can organize another forum, not too in the distant future, so that we can discuss this topic further. Because I think as we go, this project, as it unfolds, at different times, there are things that we should be contributing at that time very quickly early on. So I will be drawing a series of these discussions for ELM/Lantau Tomorrow discussions. So thank you all for your time this evening. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And thank you so much for your support. And if you do have any other comments that you want to write in, please feel free to do so. We'd like to hear from our members. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Jeannie. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Stay safe.
Good night.